In this video, we'll look at how to create a custom cabinet door. The program has thousands of doors to choose from, ranging from custom to manufacturer specific. Chances are the door you may be interested in may already exist. However, if it does not, and you want to create a specific door, this can be accomplished in Chief Architect in two different approaches. The first is to use 3D solids, create the shapes, then subtract the solids from one another to create the door. The second is to use a combination of 3D solids and molding profiles for the door shape. Let's begin with the first approach, using 3D solids to create a simple custom frame and panel door. When creating a custom cabinet door, I like to do that in an elevation view. I'm going to use the elevation camera, and I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag right through the middle of my screen to create this elevation. Now on the left hand side is a frame and panel door that I've already created using the solids. I'm going to go through the steps and use the solid tools to recreate this. Using the solid tool, I'm going to come over and I'm going to click and drag to create the size or the shape of the door. It's not that important that you get the right dimensions. However, before you release your mouse button and you press the tab key, you can enter the coordinates. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and make a solid that's 14 inches wide by 21 inches high. Now you may see a cross box because I drew this in the elevation camera. I'll just go back over into the kitchen and bath view. You can see where this created it. I'm just going to slide that back and I'm going to pull that down until it's 3/4 of an inch. And it's actually easy just to double click on this and then set the depth of it. And for this solid, I'm going to make it 3/4 of an inch thick. Now back in the elevation view, what I'm going to do is create another 3D solid that is 3 inches smaller than the solid we drew. A couple ways you can do that. One is click on the solid, and I'm going to go ahead and use the copy and paste in place. You'll see this down in my lower left hand menu. So you see the paste and hold position. That's going to create a copy of that 3D solid in the same coordinates. I'm going to move my mouse over the end and you see my cursor change. Well, it's changing. I'm going to hold the letter C down, pull that in, and you can see it concentrically resizing. Now you can press the tab key before you release it and you could put in 3 inches. And that will pull that in exactly 3 inches. Another way you can do that, let me delete it and I'll show you another way, is go ahead and go into your preferences and you can set the concentric resizing edit. And let's just go into the preferences and I'll show you where that's at. Under edit behaviors, you see the concentric jump. I'm going to set mine to be exactly 3 inches. And if you wanted to change your default edit type to concentric, you could come back and reset it. Now when I click on this object, use the copy tool, paste and hold position, and now when I pull that in, the edit is going to be in the concentric mode and it will jump the amount we entered, in this case 3 inches. So I've now created two solids. I'm going to move over into the floor plan view and I'm going to position these. So as I zoom in just a little bit here, I'm going to go ahead and pull this out slightly about to the midpoint, and now you can see that the smaller solid is now outside of the larger solid. And if we take a 3D view, it may be a little easier to see what we've got going on. So just point and click in that direction. You can see the solid on the right hand side of the screen. As you zoom in a little bit, you can see where the smaller solid is protruding slightly from the larger. To subtract the smaller solid, I'm going to go ahead and click on the larger solid. In the lower portion of my edit menu is the tool for subtraction. I'm going to go ahead and click on that tool, and then I'm going to click on the center smaller object to remove it. The program will ask you if you want to retain the two original shapes. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and say no, remove those, and now as I press the space bar, you can see that I now have a simple frame and panel. You can go into the library, pull up your favorite material, and you can apply that to the object. Now that the material and the shape of the cabinet door are set, I'm going to add this into the library. I'm going to do that by clicking on the object. Up in my menu, underneath Tools, I'm going to come down to Symbol, and I'm going to use the Convert to Symbol tool. The program will ask you what you want to convert, and it will give you the entire scene, which would be both doors, or just a selected object. Using the selected object, I'm going to come over and I'm going to give it a name. In this case, I'm going to say custom cabinet door that is a 3D solid. And then add to library. Make sure from the category drop down for the symbol you choose that it's a cabinet door or drawer. Then underneath the show advanced options, let's go ahead and check that. The symbol specification will open up. There are a few options in here, specifically on the options panel. If you're going to be creating a drawer, make sure you mark it as treat drawer underneath the options. And then for the 3D information, you can come down, make adjustments to the symbol name, and then on sizing, I'm going to do this talking about stretch planes. I've placed a couple stretch planes so it maintains the ratio of the frame to panel. For the time being, we'll go ahead and add that into our library. You can see the door appear in my custom library, and then over in the floor plan view, if I drop in a cabinet off to the side and then go back into the 3D view, I can now grab this cabinet door out of the library, come over and replace that object onto the cabinet. Now you might notice that we didn't put any stretch planes in, and the top of the frame panel, based on the ratio of this door, is much smaller than the side, and the side is probably overly thick. So let's come back over and let's actually add the sizing information in here. So I'm going to click on the open symbol, and then on the sizing panel I'm going to come down and I want to put a stretch plane in. You'll see this visually. So the first stretch plane is in the x-axis, and you can kind of see that as I rotate around the x-y axis. And then I'm also going to put one in the z-axis of 10.5 inches, about halfway up. So I now have two stretch planes, so it will symmetrically resize this and not create a distorted frame and panel. So let's go ahead and update that. Let's reapply the door, and now you can see the sizing is now symmetrical and scaled based on what we want to do. Let's move on and take a look at the steps of creating a molding profile combined with using 3D solids to create a little more interesting cabinet door. When I create a custom cabinet door using a profile that I'm going to draw, I like to do this in an area of the program under CAD details. You can see I'm in my project browser, and I currently have a CAD detail called the cabinet door molding profile. The way I go about creating a new CAD detail, this is just an extra workspace that I like to work in that won't clutter up my plan. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the CAD details. I'm going to come in and I'm going to say new CAD detail. And I'm going to go ahead and type in the cabinet molding profile number 2. So this is now a blank area, and then I'm going to draw a line that's going to be pretty small just so I know about what the length of this line is. If we look at the length of this line, I'm actually going to open it up. I know that this profile is about 3 or 4 inches, so I'm just going to type in 3 inches. I'm going to zoom in until I can actually see this line so it's easier to set the scale, because my molding profile is about 2.5 inches. So this is just a helpful way to get to the scale that I'm interested in. Now I've gone ahead and created a capture of this image just using my screen capture utility. So you can see this. I'm just going to go ahead and copy that, Control C or Command C on my keyboard. And then I'm going to come into the program and I'm going to paste this as a picture using Control V or Command V, and then I'm going to rotate it so I can actually see it. So let's go ahead and rotate this so we can see it in more of the typical view that it's going to be used. You can see that there's a dimension for the vertical portion of this molding at 2 7/16. And I'm going to actually rescale this, trace over it, and I'm actually going to trace over the two different molding profiles, create an upper portion for the door, and then I'm going to create a smaller molding profile for the lower portion. This is going to allow me to be able to separate the materials if I ever want to change the materials and paint these doors a slightly different color. To rescale the image, I'll select it, and in the lower edit menu use the point-to-point resize. With the crosshairs on, I'll click on the bottom portion of the profile and then click on the upper portion of the profile and enter in the distance of 2 7/16 inches. This just makes it easier so as I trace over the top of it that I can easily scale it. So to trace over the top of it, I'm going to use the CAD box tool, and we'll come in here and I'm going to draw a box right over the top of it. And let me turn off my snapping. And with this CAD box drawn over the top of the molding profile, I'm going to add a few breaks in here and then we're going to shape it. Let's begin at the top. I'm going to use the scroll on my mouse and zoom in a little bit. Select the CAD box. I'm going to use the break tool. This is either number 3 on your keyboard, or you'll find the break tool down in the lower edit menu. And I'm not going to be too exact, but I'm going to create a few breaks right in here. It may be easier if I have my crosshairs on, and put a few breaks in here. So you see these little breaks that I've created. And to make sure my editing is turned off of concentric, I'm going to go back into my preferences and I'm going to turn that back on to default. I'll usually use the hotkey of letter C for concentric and not actually change this when I'm doing that editing as we resized earlier. So go ahead and pull this back in to about that area, and then with this lower line selected, I'm going to use the change line to arc. Zoom in a little bit closer. You can kind of move that up and down, and then let's go ahead and I'm going to pull this one back until we get our snap there. Same tool, change line to arc. Pull that edit handle out. So the upper portion looks good. Do the exact same edit down below. And I'm just going to put a break in here. Again, I'm not trying to be too exact in here. I'll put another break in there. Pull that in to this area in here. See the red selection handle? That will arc that line. Zoom in, pull that out, and then one more edit over here. And then we'll create that line as an arc. Make sure you get the red selection handle. Pull that out, and now that looks pretty good. So you can kind of look around, make sure that it matches up. It's a closed polyline. You can see that it's shaded, and now what I can do while it's selected is add this into my library. So let's go ahead, while it's selected, use the add to library. You see that show up in my library, and I'm just going to make this the upper portion, so we'll just rename it, and then we'll just do the same thing on the lower portion of the molding. So use the CAD box. I'm going to pick up the snap from the upper one, pull that down. I'm going to make this, let's say, 1.5 inches. So let's go ahead and pull that in at 1.5 inches. I press the tab key to get this inner coordinates dialog up. So now I have 1.5 inches molding. I'm going to select it, use the number 3 on my keyboard, and I'm going to put a break in here. And then I'm going to pull this line over. And then I think I'll put one more break right in this area right in here. And then I'll pull that so it's parallel with the top line. And now I can use the change line to arc and try to get the similar shape with that lower molding profile. It's still selected. While it's selected, I'm going to add that into the library. And let's just come over here and let's rename that. So we'll come over and I'm just going to call that lower. So I have an upper and lower molding. With the two moldings created, I'm going to move back over into my elevation view. Then I'm going to use the CAD box tool again. We'll come in here and I'm just going to click and drag. Let's press the tab key while we're dragging. I'm going to make that 14 by 21 inches. Slide that over a little bit so we're not so close to the cabinet. Now the profile that we had was 2 7/16 inches in the depth. So I'm going to resize this concentrically the 2 7/16. So let's move back over into the preferences, and I want to come back into that edit for concentric. I'm going to zero that out. I don't want to come in here every time that I want to concentrically resize something and type in the value. I'm going to show you how to do that on the fly depending on the value you want. So that's now zeroed out. I'm going to select the CAD box, hold my letter C down over the corner. I'm going to slide it in. As I'm sliding it in, I'm going to press the tab key before I release. Then I'm going to come in and I'm going to put in minus 2 7/16 for the X direction and 2 7/16 for the Y direction. Those plus or minus values will depend on which corner you drug from, but it will always be the same positive or negative value. So now that I've resized that, I'm going to convert that to a molding profile using the tool in my lower edit menu called Convert Polyline. I'm going to choose the option for a 3D molding polyline, and then we're going to come in. This is the last molding we created. I want to replace that with the molding for the upper portion, and then you can check the sizing, 3/4 by 2 7/16. That looks pretty good. And then we're going to repeat the same process for the inner molding. So let's go ahead and draw our CAD box inside of the existing molding. You see the snaps pick up. Then I'm going to resize this concentrically 1.5 inches, which is the thickness or the depth of that molding. So move over the edit handle, press the letter C for concentric while holding it down, using the left mouse button to click. Before I release either, I'm going to press the tab key. Requires a little dexterity there. So we want minus 1.5 in the X and 1.5 in the Y. Then that will resize it. Same exercise to convert that using the convert polyline to a 3D molding. And then we'll find that molding profile. So here is the molding profile. Check the thickness, and that looks pretty good. And then the next step will be to fill the center with a 3D solid. We'll move back over to the floor plan view and make sure everything lines up. So for the 3D solid, I'm going to use the CAD box and drag that down into there so I get the snaps, and I'll just convert that into a 3D solid. This is probably going to make it pretty big, so let's change the depth of that to, let's say, 1 inch, so we'll be able to edit it a little bit easier. And once we've got that, I'm now going to move back into the floor plan view and take a section through the door to make sure everything is lined up. So let's move back over into the floor plan view. Let's go ahead and zoom into this molding polyline and 3D solid that we have. And I'm going to create a section through here to make sure everything lines up. And you can kind of see already that we want to take this lower molding polyline and pull that so that it's forward of the door. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to pull that forward. So just grab that move handle and pull it so it's forward of the door. And then this 3D solid should be also even with that. So just kind of pull it back and maybe leave it a little bit thicker in the back. And then let's use our back clip cross-section camera to see what we have. So I'm just going to click and drag right through a very small section of the door. And once that generates, we can kind of figure out where the alignment needs to be. And it actually looks pretty good. So you look at the original profile. So we kind of come back over here into the original profile. You can see where that door recedes into the panel. So that looks like we have it pretty well lined up. Let's scroll down. We want the outside of this to be aligned. So let's go ahead and move back into the 3D view. And if we zoom in just a little bit, you can see the door. Now I'm going to create 3 different materials on this so that when I import it, it will have 3 unique materials. I'll correct that later, but I want to be able to make sure that I can paint all 3 of these components a different color if I want to. So just to make this easy, let's go ahead and let's just do a search here for cherry. And once we find the cherry, let's go ahead and apply it to the inside. I now have 3 unique materials. Now to add this into the library, I'm going to click on the solid. I'm going to hold my shift key down. I'm going to click on the next molding polyline and then move over and click on the final molding polyline. You should see in your lower edit menu that you have 3 objects selected. Then underneath the tools, we'll come in for the symbol information, and I want to convert this into a symbol. Now these will be very similar steps to what we did previously. So I'm going to go ahead and select the selected objects to convert to a symbol. Make sure that the category is door and drawer. We'll make sure that we review the advanced options. And then in this dialog, we did sizing before. We'll also want to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the sizing. You see the width, you get a visual indicator. And then on the height, we'll go ahead and set that to be halfway up, so 10.5 inches. So you see the visual sizing of that. For options, remember if you're doing a drawer, make sure you check the treat as drawer front. And then on the 3D information, let's just go ahead and add that this is a custom door with moldings. You now see the door added into the library, and to apply that door, just simply click on it. Make sure your scoping is set either for component or object mode. Click on the door and you can replace it. I have 3 different colors. That may look a little odd, so you can use your material eyedropper, paint that as a solid color, and re-add it in the library. It is an extra step. I probably like to do that. That way it doesn't look a little bit odd. So just moving back into the floor plan view here, I'll come over, find the cabinet door, place it in the floor plan view, and then from the camera view, I'll use the material eyedropper, pick up the color that I want, and simply apply it to all three components. Then it's very easy to click on that door, add it back into the library. It's a solid color in your library. You can then apply it, and you still have the flexibility using the eyedropper to change each individual component of that cabinet door, which is a nice advantage. And that wraps up this video on creating custom cabinet doors.